Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stood behind the register at Quickmart. The summer heat was brutal, and the air conditioning had been broken for 3 days. At 19 years old, he had been working this job for 8 months, saving every penny for college. His manager, Mr. Peterson, was notorious for being cheap and rarely fixed anything unless customers complained loudly enough. The store was quiet that Tuesday afternoon. Only a few customers wandered the aisles, picking up sodas and snacks. Marcus scrolled through his phone, checking his bank balance for the 100th time that week. He needed another $2,000 for his first semester at community college. His parents had made it clear they couldn't help with tuition, so everything depended on this minimum wage job. The bell above the door chimed, and Marcus looked up to see an elderly man walking in. The man moved slowly, using a wooden cane to support himself. He wore a faded denim jacket despite the heat, and Marcus could see various patches and pins decorating it. The old man's face was weathered and lined, suggesting a lifetime of hard experiences. As the elderly customer made his way through the store, Marcus noticed something glinting on the back of his jacket. It was a military emblem, a small, silver flag pin that caught the fluorescent lights perfectly. The pin looked expensive, maybe even real silver. Marcus found himself staring at it as the old man bent down to pick up a bottle of water from the cooler. The teenager's mind began racing. That pin would probably sell for good money online, maybe $50 or $60, possibly more if it was authentic military issue. That would buy groceries for 2 weeks or help with his textbook fund. His conscience tugged at him, but the financial pressure was overwhelming. His rent was due in 5 days, and he was already behind on his phone bill. The old man approached the counter with his water and a small bag of peanuts. His movements were careful and deliberate, and Marcus noticed his hands shaking slightly as he reached for his wallet. The elderly customer smiled warmly at Marcus, revealing missing teeth and deep crow's feet around his eyes. "Hot day today, isn't it, son?" the old man said in a gravelly voice that spoke of years of smoking or maybe just age. "Yes, sir, really hot," Marcus replied, his eyes still drawn to that silver emblem. The pin was even more detailed up close. He could make out tiny stars and intricate engravings that suggested it wasn't just any ordinary decoration. As the old man fumbled with his wallet, pulling out crumpled bills and loose change, Marcus noticed his customer's jacket was hanging loose. The pin was attached near the collar area, easily accessible. The elderly man seemed focused on counting his money, mumbling numbers under his breath. "That'll be $3.50, Marcus said, his voice slightly strained. The old man counted out exact change, his arthritic fingers struggling with the coins. While he was distracted, Marcus felt an overwhelming urge to reach out. His hand moved almost on its own, fingers extending toward the shiny emblem. The rational part of his brain screamed warnings, but his desperation overruled his better judgment. In one quick motion, Marcus plucked the pin from the old man's jacket. His heart pounded as he palmed the small piece of metal, hoping the customer wouldn't notice. The elderly man was still focused on his change, completely unaware of what had just happened. "Thank you, son," the old man said, pocketing his receipt. "You have a good day now." "You too, sir," Marcus managed, his voice barely steady. As the customer walked toward the exit, Marcus felt a mixture of guilt and relief. He had done it. The pin was now hidden in his closed fist, warm from his sweaty palm. He told himself it was just a small thing, something the old man probably wouldn't even miss. Maybe it wasn't even that valuable anyway. The elderly man paused at the door and turned back. For a terrifying moment, Marcus thought he had been caught. But the old man just waved goodbye with a gentle smile before disappearing into the afternoon heat. Marcus waited until he was sure the customer was gone before examining his prize. The pin was indeed beautiful, a miniature American flag with what appeared to be military insignia surrounding it. The craftsmanship was exceptional, with tiny details that would have required skilled metalwork. This was definitely worth something substantial. He slipped the pin into his pocket and tried to continue his shift normally. But guilt gnawed at him throughout the rest of the afternoon. Every time the door chimed, He half expected to see the old man returning, having discovered his missing emblem. The weight of what he had done pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. By closing time, Marcus had convinced himself that he had made the right choice. The old man seemed well off enough. He had paid in cash without hesitation. Meanwhile, Marcus was struggling to survive on his own, working hard to build a better future. Sometimes desperate times required difficult choices. That evening, Marcus researched military pins online. What he discovered made his stomach drop. The emblem wasn't just valuable. It was a distinguished service medal reproduction, the kind given to veterans who had served with exceptional honor. These pins were deeply meaningful to military families and could be worth hundreds of dollars to collectors. As he lay in bed that night, Marcus clutched the stolen pin in his hand. He had crossed a line he never thought he would cross. But there was no going back now. Tomorrow, he would figure out how to sell it discreetly. He needed that money more than some old man needed a piece of metal. What Marcus didn't know was that the elderly customer wasn't just any veteran. He was Sergeant Major William Hayes, a decorated soldier who had served 3 tours in Vietnam and had received multiple commendations for bravery. The pin Marcus had stolen wasn't just valuable. It was a replica of his Medal of Honor citation, given to him by his late wife before she passed away from cancer. The pin represented everything Sergeant Major Hayes held dear: his service to his country, his fallen comrades, and the memory of his beloved wife who had supported him through decades of nightmares and recovery. It was the one possession he treasured above all others, and he wore it every day as a reminder of the sacrifices made for freedom. When Sergeant Major Hayes discovered the missing pin the next morning while getting dressed, his world crumbled. He searched his small apartment frantically, checking every corner and crevice. The pin had to be somewhere. It couldn't just disappear. But deep in his heart, he knew exactly where he had lost it, and the realization that someone had taken advantage of his trust cut deeper than any enemy bullet ever had. Sergeant Major Hayes sat in his worn leather recliner, staring at the empty spot on his jacket where the pin should have been. His hands trembled, but not from age this time, from pure emotion. That pin had been with him for over 40 years, through deployments, hospitals, funerals, and the darkest nights of his life. His wife, Martha, had given it to him during his recovery from his 3rd tour in Vietnam. She had saved for months to buy the custom-made replica of his Medal of Honor citation, complete with his unit's insignia and service dates. "So you never forget how proud I am of you," she had whispered when she pinned it to his jacket the day he came home. Now Martha was gone, taken by cancer 3 years ago, and that pin was his last tangible connection to her love and support. Without it, he felt lost and hollow, like a part of his soul had been ripped away. Hayes knew he had to return to the store. Maybe he had dropped it, maybe it had fallen behind the counter, maybe there was still hope. He called his neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been helping him with errands since his arthritis had worsened. "I need to go back to that little store on Maple Street," he told her over the phone, his voice shaking. "I lost something very important." Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind woman in her 50s who treated Hayes like family, immediately agreed to drive him. She had heard him talk about Martha and the pin many times. She understood what this meant to him. When they arrived at Quick Mart, Hayes felt his heart racing. Marcus was behind the register again, looking tired and distracted. The young man's face went pale when he saw the elderly veteran walking through the door. "Excuse me, son." Hayes approached the counter with Mrs. Rodriguez beside him for support. "I was here yesterday, and I think I might have lost something. A small pin, silver, with an American flag on it. It means everything to me." Marcus felt like he might throw up. The stolen pin was hidden in his bedroom at home, wrapped in tissue paper inside his desk drawer. He had spent all morning researching how to sell it online, but seeing the old man's desperate face made his chest tighten with shame. I haven't seen anything like that." Marcus lied, his voice cracking slightly. "Maybe it fell outside in the parking lot." Hayes nodded sadly, but Mrs. Rodriguez noticed something was wrong. She had raised 4 children and could spot a guilty conscience from a mile away. The young clerk was sweating despite the air conditioning finally working, and He wouldn't make eye contact with Hayes. "Are you sure you haven't seen it?" she asked Marcus directly, her tone firm but not accusatory. This pin belonged to his late wife. It's not valuable to anyone else, but it means the world to him. The weight of guilt nearly crushed Marcus. He wanted to confess everything, to run to his car and retrieve the pin immediately. But fear held him back. If he admitted to stealing, he would lose his job. Without this job, he couldn't pay rent or save for school. His entire future would collapse. "I'm really sorry," Marcus said quietly, "but I haven't seen anything like that." Hayes thanked him anyway and left his phone number, asking Marcus to call if the pin turned up. As the elderly veteran and Mrs. Rodriguez walked away, Marcus heard Hayes say, "Martha's going to be so disappointed in me. I promised her I'd never lose it." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. This wasn't just about money or value. This was about love, loss, and a broken promise to a dead wife. He had stolen someone's most precious memory. That afternoon, Marcus couldn't concentrate on anything. Every customer who walked in seemed to look at him with suspicion. His manager noticed his distracted behavior and warned him to pay attention or face consequences. But Marcus barely heard the threat. His mind was consumed with images of the heartbroken old man searching for his lost treasure. During his break, Marcus called his friend Jake, desperate to talk to someone about what he had done. "Dude, you actually stole from an old man?" Jake said incredulously. "That's messed up, even for you." "I needed the money," Marcus protested weakly. "You know how tight things are. So what are you going to do now?" The guy came back looking for it. He knows he lost it there. Marcus had been asking himself the same question all day. "I don't know. Maybe I can just sell it quickly and pretend it never happened. Or you could, I don't know, give it back." Jake suggested. "Tell him you found it or something. And risk him getting suspicious? What if he asks questions? What if he calls the cops?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "Man, you're really going to keep a dead woman's gift to her husband? That's cold, even for someone who's broke." The conversation left Marcus feeling even worse. He spent the rest of his shift in a daze, mechanically scanning items and making change while his conscience waged war with his desperation. That evening, Hayes sat in his apartment, holding a framed photograph of Martha. In the picture, she was pinning the emblem to his jacket for the first time, both of them smiling with the joy of reunion after his final deployment. He had been so young then, so damaged by war, and she had been his anchor to sanity and hope. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he whispered to the photograph. "I don't know how I lost it. Maybe my memory is going. Maybe I'm just getting too old to take care of the things that matter." Unknown to Hayes, Mrs. Rodriguez had been thinking about the young clerk's reaction all day. Something about his nervous behavior bothered her. She had seen enough guilty teenagers in her time to recognize the signs. That night, she made a decision that would change everything. She drove back to Quick Mart just before closing time. Marcus was alone in the store, counting the register and preparing to lock up. When he saw her walking through the door, his heart started racing again. "We're actually closed," he said quickly, hoping she would leave. "I know," Mrs. Rodriguez replied, her voice gentle but firm. "I want to talk to you about Mr. Hayes and his pin." Marcus felt trapped. There was nowhere to run, no escape from the conversation he had been dreading. "I told you I haven't seen it," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Mrs. Rodriguez stepped closer to the counter. "Son, I've been a mother for 25 years. I know when someone is lying to protect themselves. That old man is heartbroken. He's not eating, he's not sleeping, and he's convinced he's losing his mind because he can't remember where he lost the most important thing he owns." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes despite his efforts to stay composed. "I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me the truth," she said softly. "Did you take his pin?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Marcus realized this was his moment of choice. He could continue lying and live with the guilt forever, or he could finally do the right thing and face the consequences. But fear still controlled him. "I didn't take anything," he whispered, hating himself even as the words left his mouth. Mrs. Rodriguez studied his face for a long moment, then nodded sadly. "Okay, son, but remember, Some mistakes you can fix, and some you have to live with forever. Make sure you choose the right one. After she left, Marcus locked the store and sat in his car in the empty parking lot. He pulled out his phone and looked up the online listing he had been preparing for the pin. All he had to do was post it, and his money problems would be solved. But Mrs. Rodriguez's words echoed in his mind, and for the first time since the theft, he truly understood the magnitude of what he had done. Marcus couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Hayes searching through his apartment, probably turning over every cushion and checking every pocket for the 100th time. The stolen pin seemed to burn through his desk drawer, demanding attention like a guilty secret that refused to stay hidden. By Thursday morning, Marcus had made his decision. He would sell the pin online immediately, before his conscience could weaken his resolve further. He took photos from every angle, highlighting the intricate details and military insignia. The listing was ready to post with a starting bid of $200. But as his finger hovered over the submit button, his phone rang. It was Mr. Peterson, his manager, calling with unexpected news. "Marcus, we're getting some kind of official visit today," Peterson said, sounding annoyed. "Some military guys want to review our security footage from Tuesday. Something about a missing item from a veteran customer. You better make sure everything looks professional when they arrive." Marcus's blood turned to ice. Military officials? Security footage? He had been so focused on the customer that he hadn't even thought about the cameras. Quickmart had 3 security cameras, one over the register, one at the entrance, and one monitoring the aisles. "What time are they coming?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Around noon. And, Marcus, if there's anything you know about this situation, now would be the time to speak up. I don't want any surprises." The line went dead, leaving Marcus in a state of panic. He had exactly 4 hours before his crime would be exposed on video for military officials to see. There would be no denying what he had done, no way to explain away the footage of him stealing from an elderly veteran. Marcus called in sick to work, claiming food poisoning. He spent the morning pacing his small apartment, holding the stolen pin, and tried to figure out a solution. He could mail it back anonymously, but that wouldn't explain how it disappeared from Hayes' jacket in the first place. He could claim he found it later, but the security footage would show him taking it. At 11:30 a.m., desperation drove him to make a different choice. He would return the pin directly to Hayes and confess everything before the military officials could review the footage. Maybe if he showed genuine remorse and returned the item voluntarily, the consequences wouldn't be as severe. Marcus drove to the address Hayes had written down when he left his contact information. The elderly veteran lived in a modest apartment complex that catered to seniors, with wheelchair ramps and handrails installed throughout the building. Hayes answered the door in his pajamas and robe, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, and he seemed to have aged years in just 2 days. "You're the young man from the store," Hayes said, confusion evident in his voice. "Did you find my pin?" Marcus's throat felt tight as he pulled the emblem from his pocket. "Yes, sir, I found it. I'm sorry it took so long to get it back to you." Hayes's face lit up with pure joy and relief. His hands shook as he reached for the pin, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Oh, thank God," he whispered, clutching the emblem to his chest. "I was starting to think Martha was mad at me from heaven. This was the last thing she gave me before." His voice broke with emotion. The sight of the old man's grateful tears destroyed Marcus completely. The veteran was so happy, so relieved, that he didn't question how or where the pin had been found. He just kept thanking Marcus over and over, calling him an angel and a blessing. "Where did you find it?" Hayes finally asked, wiping his eyes. Marcus had prepared a lie about finding it in the parking lot, but seeing the trust and gratitude in the old man's eyes made the words stick in his throat. Instead, he heard himself saying, "Mr. Hayes, I need to tell you something. I didn't find your pin. I took it." The confession hung between them like a physical barrier. Hayes's expression slowly changed from joy to confusion to hurt understanding. "You took it," he said quietly. "You stole it from me?" "Yes, sir," Marcus said, tears now flowing down his own face. I was desperate for money, and I thought it might be valuable. I didn't know what it meant to you. I didn't know about your wife or your service. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Hayes stepped back, looking at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time. The betrayal was visible on his face. Not just the theft, but the lie, the deception, the taking advantage of his trust. You let me think I was losing my mind, Hayes said, his voice growing stronger with righteous anger. You watched me search frantically for something you had stolen, and you said nothing. I know, Marcus sobbed. I know it was wrong. I want to give it back, but I was scared. I needed this job for college, and I thought if I admitted what I did, I would lose everything. So you decided I should lose everything instead? Hayes's military bearing returned as his spine straightened with indignation. This pin represents 43 years of marriage to the woman who saved my life. It represents my brothers who died in Vietnam while I lived. It represents honor, sacrifice, and love. And you stole it for college money. The weight of his actions crashed down on Marcus like a physical blow. He had stolen more than just metal and jewels. He had stolen memories, love, honor, and peace of mind from a man who had given everything for his country. What should I do? Marcus asked desperately. How can I make this right? Hayes looked at the pin in his hands, then back at Marcus. You can start by understanding that some things can't be made right with apologies. You betrayed trust, son. You took advantage of an old man who treated you with kindness and respect. Before Marcus could respond, they heard the sound of vehicles pulling into the parking lot. Through the window, they could see 2 military Humvees and a police car arriving. Men in uniform were getting out, checking building numbers. That would be the investigation team, Hayes said grimly. When I reported the theft to the VA this morning, they took it very seriously. Apparently, stealing from veterans triggers some kind of federal protocol. Marcus felt his legs go weak. Federal protocol? The FBI handles crimes against veterans in certain circumstances. Hayes explained, his voice cold and professional now. And when security footage is involved, they like to make examples. The knock on Hayes's door came exactly 60 seconds later. When the elderly veteran opened it, Marcus found himself facing 2 FBI agents, a military police officer, and a local detective. They all looked serious, professional, and completely unsympathetic to his panicked expression. Sergeant Major Hayes, the lead FBI agent said, "We're here about the investigation into your stolen military decoration. We've reviewed the security footage from QuickMart, and we have some questions." Hayes looked at Marcus, who was frozen in terror beside the window. For a moment, the old veteran's expression softened with something that might have been pity. "Actually, gentlemen," Hayes said slowly, "there's been a development in the case. The young man who took my pin is here, and he's just returned it voluntarily." The agents looked at Marcus with renewed interest. One of them stepped forward, pulling out handcuffs. "Marcus Thompson," the agent said, having clearly done his homework, "you're under arrest for theft of government property and elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Marcus realized that his moment of greed had cost him everything he had been trying to protect. His job, his college dreams, his freedom, all lost for a pin that never should have left an old man's jacket. The last thing he saw before being led away was Hayes carefully pinning the emblem back to his jacket, his hands steady now that his most precious possession was safely home. The county jail was nothing like Marcus had imagined. The holding cell smelled of disinfectant and despair, filled with men who had made their own series of poor choices. Marcus sat on the hard bench, still wearing his QuickMart uniform, trying to process how his life had changed so dramatically in just a few hours. His phone call had gone to his parents, who listened in stunned silence as he explained his arrest. His mother cried, his father shouted, and both made it clear that they couldn't afford bail or a lawyer. Marcus was on his own, just like he had been when he started stealing. Federal charges, his cellmate, a weathered man named Rodriguez, said after hearing Marcus's story. "That's serious business, kid. They don't mess around when it comes to veteran crimes. You're looking at real prison time, not just county jail." The reality hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had thrown away his entire future for a pin worth maybe $300. His college dreams, his independence, his clean record, all gone because he couldn't control his desperation for just a few more minutes. Meanwhile, at Hayes's apartment, the elderly veteran was experiencing his own emotional turmoil. He had his pin back, but the violation of trust left him feeling hollow and suspicious. Every interaction with young people now carried the shadow of betrayal. The grocery store clerk, the delivery driver, his neighbor's teenage grandson. Everyone seemed potentially dangerous now. Mrs. Rodriguez visited Hayes that evening, bringing homemade soup and concerned questions about his well-being. "I knew something was wrong with that boy," she said, sitting across from Hayes at his small kitchen table. The guilt was written all over his face. "I just wish I had pushed harder to get the truth out of him before it went this far." Hayes stirred his soup absently, staring at the pin now safely attached to his jacket hanging by the door. "Maybe if I had been more aware, more careful, this never would have happened. Martha always said I was too trusting." "Don't you blame yourself for that young man's choices," Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. Being kind and trusting isn't a character flaw. It's what makes you a good man." But Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that he had somehow failed. As a soldier, he had been trained to be vigilant, to watch for threats, and protect valuable assets. How had he let a teenager steal from him so easily? Was he becoming too old and weak to take care of himself? 3 days later, Marcus appeared before a federal magistrate for his arraignment. The charges were more serious than he had anticipated: theft of government property, elder abuse, and fraud. The prosecutor, a stern woman in her 40s named Lisa Chun, laid out the case with clinical precision. "Your Honor, Mr. Thompson deliberately targeted an elderly veteran and stole a military decoration of significant personal and historical value. Security footage clearly shows the defendant taking advantage of the victim's distraction to commit this theft. The psychological impact on Sergeant Major Hayes has been substantial, requiring counseling services through the VA." Marcus's court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking man named Robert Kim, did his best to argue for leniency. "Your Honor, my client is a 19-year-old first-time offender who made a terrible mistake under financial pressure. He returned the item voluntarily and showed immediate remorse. We asked the court to consider his youth and clean record when determining appropriate consequences." The magistrate, Judge Patricia Williams, looked at Marcus with the expression of someone who had seen too many young lives derailed by poor choices. "Mr. Thompson, the court acknowledges your age and previous clean record. However, the nature of this crime, targeting an elderly veteran and stealing an item of deep personal significance, requires serious consequences. You are hereby remanded to custody pending trial, with bail set at $50,000. Marcus felt his world collapse entirely. $50,000 might as well have been $50 million. His family didn't have that kind of money, and no bail bondsman would take the risk on an unemployed teenager with federal charges. Back at Quickmart, Mr. Peterson was dealing with his own problems. Corporate had launched an investigation into the security breach, questioning why employees weren't properly monitored and why the theft wasn't detected immediately. Peterson faced possible termination and legal liability for inadequate supervision. "How am I supposed to watch every employee every second of every day?" Peterson complained to his wife over dinner. "That kid seemed trustworthy. He was always on time, never stole from the register, never caused problems. How was I supposed to know he would steal from a customer?" The story had also hit local news, with headlines about a teenager stealing from a war veteran. Social media exploded with outrage, and Marcus's name and photo were shared thousands of times with angry comments about disrespecting the military and preying on the elderly. Jake, Marcus's friend, found himself fielding angry messages from classmates and community members who knew about their friendship. The guilt by association was destroying his own reputation, and he began to distance himself from Marcus's situation. "I told him to give it back," Jake explained to anyone who would listen. "I never supported what he did. We weren't even that close." 2 weeks into his incarceration, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Sergeant Major Hayes sat across from him in the jail's visiting room, looking older but more determined than when Marcus had last seen him. "Why are you here?" Marcus asked, confused and ashamed to face his victim again. "Because I've been thinking about something my wife used to say," Hayes replied, his voice steady but not unkind. "She believed that everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes and become better. I'm not here to forgive you. That will take time. But I am here to understand why you thought stealing from me was acceptable." Marcus struggled to find words that didn't sound like excuses. "I was desperate. I needed money for school, for rent, for everything. When I saw your pin, I thought it was just a piece of jewelry. I didn't know it was from your wife or what it meant to you. I know that doesn't make it right, but I never intended to hurt you the way I did." Hayes studied the young man's face, noting the genuine regret and the weight of consequence that had aged him beyond his 19 years. "Desperation doesn't justify theft, son. But I've been desperate too. When I came back from Vietnam, I couldn't find work, couldn't sleep, couldn't function in normal society. I made my own mistakes, though thankfully none that hurt innocent people." The conversation continued for an hour, with Hayes sharing stories of his own struggles and recovery, and Marcus opening up about the pressure he felt to succeed without support. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was understanding, and for Marcus, that meant everything. When the visit ended, Hayes left Marcus with unexpected words. "I'm not dropping the charges. You need to face the consequences of your actions. But when you get out of this, if you're serious about changing your life, come see me. Everyone deserves a second chance to do better." As Marcus was escorted back to his cell, he realized that Hayes had given him something more valuable than forgiveness. He had given him hope that redemption was possible, even after the worst mistakes. The trial was still weeks away, and Marcus faced an uncertain future. But for the first time since his arrest, he began to think about who he wanted to become rather than just what he had lost. The road ahead would be difficult, but it wasn't necessarily the end of his story. The trial came 6 months later, after Marcus had spent more time in county jail than many people serve for minor felonies. The delay was due to the federal nature of the charges and the prosecutor's busy schedule. During those months, Marcus had time to reflect, read, and slowly come to terms with the magnitude of his mistake. He had received several letters from Hayes during his incarceration, not friendly correspondence, but updates on how the theft had affected his life. Hayes wrote about sleepless nights, increased anxiety around strangers, and the difficulty of trusting people again. He also wrote about his counseling sessions at the VA and his slow journey toward healing. "I want you to understand," one letter read, "that when you stole my pen, you didn't just take an object. You stole my peace of mind, my trust in humanity, and my sense of safety in the world. These are things that can't be replaced like jewelry or money." The letters were painful to read, but Marcus forced himself to read every word. He began writing responses, not asking for forgiveness, but acknowledging the harm he had caused and sharing his own journey toward understanding why he had made such a terrible choice. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was packed with local veterans, community members, and media representatives. The case had become symbolic of a larger issue about respect for veterans and the character of young people in America. Prosecutor Chun presented her case methodically, showing the security footage that clearly captured Marcus's theft. The video was damning. It showed him deliberately waiting for Hayes to be distracted before quickly snatching the pen from his jacket. There was no ambiguity, no possibility of accident or misunderstanding. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Chun said in her opening statement, "this case is about more than theft. It's about a young man who deliberately targeted an elderly veteran, taking advantage of his trust and vulnerability to steal something of immense personal value. The defendant's actions show a calculated disregard for the dignity and service of our military veterans." Marcus's attorney, Robert Kim, did his best to present mitigating factors. He called character witnesses who testified to Marcus's previously good character, his academic achievements, and his family's financial struggles. He emphasized Marcus's voluntary return of the pin and his cooperation with authorities. "My client made a terrible mistake," Kim argued, "but he is not the calculating predator the prosecution has described. He is a scared teenager who made an impulsive decision under extreme financial pressure." His immediate remorse and voluntary confession show that this was an aberration, not a pattern of criminal behavior. When Marcus took the stand in his own defense, the courtroom fell silent. He had lost weight during his incarceration and looked younger than his 19 years, but his words carried the weight of genuine understanding. "I can't undo what I did," he said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I can't give Mr. Hayes back his sense of safety or trust. I can't erase the hurt I caused or the nights he couldn't sleep because of my actions. All I can do is tell you that I understand now how wrong I was and promise that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be better than the person who stole from a war hero." The most powerful moment of the trial came when Hayes himself took the stand. The elderly veteran walked slowly to the witness box, wearing his military dress uniform decorated with his actual medals and commendations. The pin that Marcus had stolen was prominently displayed, catching the courtroom lights. Hayes testified about the theft's impact on his daily life, his mental health, and his ability to trust others. But he also surprised everyone by speaking about his visits with Marcus in jail and the young man's apparent genuine remorse. "What he did was inexcusable," Hayes said firmly. "But I've seen real evil in my life, and this young man isn't evil. He's foolish, desperate, and criminally wrong in his choices, but he's not beyond redemption. I believe in consequences for actions, but I also believe in the possibility of people changing for the better." The jury deliberated for 2 days before reaching their verdict: guilty on all charges. Marcus felt his legs weaken as the verdict was read, knowing that his life was about to change forever. Judge Williams scheduled sentencing for the following month, giving both sides time to prepare their arguments about appropriate punishment. The federal guidelines suggested 2 to 4 years in prison, but the judge had discretion to consider mitigating factors. During the month between conviction and sentencing, something unexpected happened. Hayes began a letter-writing campaign, not to excuse Marcus's actions, but to advocate for a sentence that included rehabilitation rather than just punishment. He wrote to the judge, to local officials, and to veteran organizations, arguing that Marcus needed guidance and education more than he needed years in federal prison. Hayes proposed an alternative: a shorter jail term combined with extensive community service, specifically helping veterans and elderly community members. "If we want this young man to truly understand the value of service and sacrifice," Hayes wrote to Judge Williams, "then we should give him the opportunity to serve and sacrifice for others. Prison will only harden him and waste the potential for real learning and growth." The proposal gained unexpected support from veteran groups who had initially called for harsh punishment. Local VFW chapters and American Legion posts endorsed a community service program that would put Marcus to work helping elderly veterans with daily tasks, home maintenance, and companionship. On sentencing day, the courtroom was again packed, but the atmosphere was different. Instead of pure anger and demand for retribution, there was a sense of anticipation about what kind of justice would be served. Judge Williams had clearly given the case serious consideration. She spoke for 20 minutes about the nature of justice, the purpose of punishment, and the possibility of redemption. "Mr. Thompson," she said, looking directly at Marcus, "your crime was serious, and the harm you caused was real and significant. However, I have been moved by the extraordinary character of your victim, Sergeant Major Hayes, who has shown that true strength lies not in vengeance, but in the courage to help others become better." The sentence was 18 months in federal minimum security prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation, during which Marcus would complete 2,000 hours of community service, specifically helping veterans and elderly community members. Additionally, he would be required to speak at schools and community events about his crime and its consequences. As Marcus was led away to begin his sentence, Hayes approached him one final time. "When you get out," the old veteran said quietly, "come see me. I meant what I said about second chances. But you have to earn it by becoming someone worthy of that chance." 18 months later, Marcus was released to begin his probation and community service. He had used his time in prison to earn his GED and complete several vocational training programs. He was no longer the desperate teenager who had stolen from an elderly veteran. His first stop after release was Hayes's apartment. The old man answered the door wearing his jacket with the pin prominently displayed, but his expression had softened from stern judgment to cautious hope. "Are you ready to do the work?" Hayes asked. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. "I'm ready to earn my second chance." Over the following years, Marcus worked tirelessly to fulfill his community service obligations. He helped dozens of elderly veterans with grocery shopping, home repairs, yard work, and companionship. He spoke at schools about the consequences of poor choices and the importance of respecting veterans. Slowly, through service and sacrifice, Marcus began to understand what Hayes had tried to teach him: that honor comes not from taking what you want, but from giving what you can to others. The stolen pin had cost Marcus nearly 2 years of his life and forever changed his future. But it also gave him something he might never have found otherwise: a true understanding of service, respect, and the possibility of redemption through helping others. By the time his probation ended, Marcus had become someone Hayes could be proud to call a friend. The young man who had once stolen from a war hero had become someone who spent his life serving those who had served their country. It was a hard-earned transformation, but it proved that even the worst mistakes could become the foundation for a better life.